That Tuesday morning, nobody survived. Most people think they know this story. They know the name. They know it fell. They know it became something else. But what almost nobody actually understands, what the history books gloss over, what the documentaries skip past, is what that fall did to the world. Not just to the people trapped inside its walls on that final night. Not just to the empire it represented, but to every single human being alive on Earth today. Because on a Tuesday morning in May 1453, the medieval world died, and the modern world was born screaming from its corpse. For over 1,000 years, one city stood between civilization and total collapse. Not Rome. Rome had already crumbled. Not Jerusalem, not Alexandria. Constantinople. A city so precisely positioned, so obsessively defended, so intellectually and commercially vital that every major power on Earth threw everything it had at its walls. The Persian Empire tried. The Arab Caliphate tried twice. The Vikings tried. The Bulgars tried. The Crusaders came in 1204, accidentally sacked the place, and still could not hold it permanently. For 1,000 years, empire after empire, general after general, siege after siege, the walls held. Then, on a single Tuesday morning, they did not. And in the hours that followed, the trade routes of the entire world snapped shut. Ancient manuscripts started flooding into Europe. A young Genoese sailor began dreaming of a western route to Asia. And the map of the modern world, every border, every trade route, every intellectual tradition you have ever inherited, began taking the shape you recognize today. So here's the question that matters. How does a city that survived 1,000 years of sieges fall in a single night? And why did absolutely everything change because of it? The Roman Emperor Constantine founded this city in 330 AD on a triangular peninsula where Europe physically meets Asia. And the location he chose looks less like a human decision and more like geographic inevitability. A narrow triangle of land jutting into the water where the Bosphorus meets the Sea of Marmara, controlling the only passage between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean, between Europe and Asia, between the known world and everything beyond it. Whoever held this peninsula held the throat of civilization. Constantine knew it. For 1,000 years after its founding, Constantinople was the largest, wealthiest, most educated city in the Western world. While Western Europe collapsed into feudal darkness after Rome fell, while kings were illiterate, and cities were shrinking, and roads were crumbling, and people were forgetting how to build in stone, Constantinople was thriving. Its population at peak exceeded 500,000 people. Its markets traded silk from China, spices from India, gold from Africa, and amber from the Baltic simultaneously. Its university taught Plato and Aristotle when Oxford did not yet exist. But more than its wealth, more than its trade, more than any of that, Constantinople was a library. When Rome fell and the ancient world fractured, and its accumulated knowledge began to scatter and burn and disappear, Constantinople gathered it. Every Greek philosophical text, every Roman legal code, every mathematical and scientific achievement the ancient world had ever produced. The Byzantines copied it, preserved it, studied it, taught it, breathed it. For 1,000 years, while the rest of Europe forgot, Constantinople remembered. And guarding all of it were the walls. The Theodosian walls were not simply a defensive structure. They were a psychological fact. A triple line of fortifications stretching across the landward side of the peninsula. A moat first, then an outer wall, then a terrace, then an inner wall rising nearly 12 meters high, studded with towers every 50 meters. On the seaward sides, more walls ran along the shoreline, and across the entrance to the Golden Horn Harbor, the safest naval approach to the city, a massive iron chain stretched from shore to shore, physically blocking any ship from entering. Dozens of armies had looked at these walls and turned back. Over 1,000 years, the walls had become almost mythological. The idea that they could fall had stopped feeling real. It was like imagining the sun not rising. You could technically conceive of it, but your gut simply did not believe it, which is exactly what made the man who finally broke them so extraordinary. His name was Mehmed II. He was 21 years old. This was not his first time as sultan. He had been appointed at 19 when his father, Murad II, briefly, reluctantly, retired from power. That experiment had gone badly. A crusader army invaded. Murad was called back. Mehmed was quietly set aside. He spent the years that followed watching, reading, preparing. When his father died in 1451 and Mehmed returned to the throne for good, the first thing he did was ride to the Bosphorus and stand there staring across the water at Constantinople's walls. He had been thinking about those walls for years. He spoke 6 languages. He had read Greek military histories specifically to understand how previous sieges had failed. He understood the pattern. No army had ever broken the Theodosian walls through direct assault. Every previous attempt had drowned in their sheer physical mass. So he did not plan a conventional siege. He planned something those walls had never faced before. A Hungarian engineer named Urban came to him with an offer. Urban had first approached the Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI with the same proposal: a cannon. Not an ordinary cannon, the largest cannon ever constructed. A bronze barrel 26 feet long, capable of hurling stone balls weighing 600 pounds. Constantine XI could not afford him. Mehmed paid him 4 times what he asked, and told him to build 2. When the cannons were test-fired outside Adrianople, the sound carried for miles. Birds fell from the sky mid-flight. Women in nearby villages miscarried from the shockwave alone. The stone balls buried themselves 4 feet deep in the earth on impact. The Theodosian walls had never faced anything like this. And yet, inside Constantinople, a man named Giovanni Giustiniani Longo had arrived from Genoa with 700 soldiers and a reputation as the finest defensive military mind in the entire Mediterranean world. Constantine XI gave him command of the walls. For 53 days, Giustiniani held them. On April 2nd, 1453, Mehmed's army of 80,000 men surrounded the city. Inside, 7,000 defenders manned the walls, 11-to-1 odds. The great cannons opened fire, and the ground shook and the walls cracked, and were repaired at night by hand, stone by stone, by the civilian population working by torchlight while the soldiers slept. Day after day the cannons fired. Day after day the walls cracked and were rebuilt. Day after day the Ottoman assaults came and were beaten back. Then Mehmed did something nobody in the world saw coming. The Golden Horn harbor was protected by that massive chain. No Ottoman ship could enter. So Mehmed did not sail in. He ordered 70 ships hauled overland. In a single night, his engineers greased a road of wooden logs running from the Bosphorus up over a hill and down into the Golden Horn. And 70 Ottoman warships were dragged across land on those logs by teams of oxen and men, and launched silently into the harbor before dawn. When the Byzantine defenders woke the next morning and looked down from the sea walls, the harbor they had considered impassable was full of Ottoman warships. It was one of the most audacious military engineering feats in all of recorded history. But still the walls held. Still Giustiniani held, for 53 days. Then, in the darkness before dawn on May 29, 1453, Giustiniani was struck by a crossbow bolt that pierced his armor. The wound was serious, and Giovanni Giustiniani Longo, the man whose defensive genius had held the greatest city in the world against 80,000 soldiers for nearly 2 months, made a decision that cost everything. He left his post. He asked Constantine for the key to a gate in the inner wall so he could be carried to a ship for treatment. Constantine begged him to stay. Begged him. Giustiniani left. And the soldiers on the walls who had held because he had held, who had believed because he had believed, saw their commander being carried away from the battle. Their discipline broke. In the chaos that followed, a small postern gate on the northern section of the wall, the Kirkoporta, was discovered unlocked. Whether it was forgotten in the confusion of battle or deliberately left open by a traitor, nobody has ever established with certainty. But through that small, unlocked gate, Ottoman soldiers poured into the space between the outer and inner walls. The cry went up that the city was taken from behind. The remaining defenders, caught between the cannon bombardment in front and soldiers appearing behind them, collapsed. It was not the cannons that finally broke Constantinople. It was one man's wound. One abandoned post, one unlocked gate. 1,000 years ended not with some catastrophic military failure, but with a single moment of human frailty on a dark morning in May. That is all it took. One man deciding he had enough. One door somebody forgot to lock. The entire medieval world walking out through a gap in a wall. The last Byzantine emperor was 57 years old. He had known for months this moment was probably coming. Constantine the Palaiologos had spent the final weeks of the siege sending desperate messages to Western Europe, to the Pope, to Venice, to Genoa, to the kings of Hungary, France, and Aragon. He told them what was coming. He told them what would be lost. He told them that if Constantinople fell, the last living connection to the ancient world would fall with it. The Pope sent promises. Venice sent a handful of ships that arrived too late to matter. The rest of Christian Europe largely watched. On the night of May 28th, the night before the final assault, Constantine the XI walked through the city he was about to lose. He visited his commanders. He embraced his soldiers. He walked to the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral built in 537 AD, its dome so vast the architects described it as suspended from heaven by a golden chain. And he attended the evening liturgy. Orthodox and Catholic clergy, who had spent decades in bitter theological dispute, stood together and chanted in the candlelight. Citizens who had not been inside a church in years came and knelt on the stone floor. Everyone in that building knew it was the last time. Constantine left the Hagia Sophia, mounted his horse, and rode to the walls. When the Kerkoporta broke and the city fell, Constantine the XI Palaiologos tore the imperial insignia from his armor so he would not be taken alive as a trophy. He turned to the men beside him and said, according to the chronicles, that he did not wish to live, and he threw himself into the fighting. His body was never definitively identified. The last Roman emperor, the direct successor in an unbroken line stretching back to Augustus, to Caesar, to the moment Rome first decided it was the center of the world, simply vanished into the battle. No confirmed tomb, no confirmed grave. Just a pair of imperial boots found later among a pile of bodies near the wall. A man swallowed by the history he could not stop. Mehmed II entered the city on the afternoon of May 29, 1453. He rode directly to the Hagia Sophia. He dismounted at the entrance, bent down, picked up a handful of earth, and poured it over his turban, a gesture of humility before God at the peak of his greatest triumph. He walked inside, ordered it converted into a mosque immediately, and climbed to the altar to watch the first Islamic prayer performed inside a building that had been Christian for 916 years. Then he walked alone to the ruins of the old Byzantine imperial palace. A witness recorded what happened next. Mehmed stood in the silence of the empty halls, looking at the crumbling mosaics and the overgrown courtyards, and he recited a Persian couplet by the poet Saadi, about the transience of power, about the spider who weaves its web in the palace of the Caesars, about how even the greatest things pass, and he wept. The conqueror of Constantinople, the 21-year-old who had done what 100 armies before him could not, stood in the ruins of the empire he had just destroyed and wept for it. That moment tells you everything about what kind of event this really was. Now here's what almost every account of 1453 fails to tell you. The fall of Constantinople did not just end something, it started everything. Follow the chain of consequences far enough, and you will find the entire modern world hiding inside a single day in May 1453. The Ottoman Empire now controlled the overland trade routes between Europe and Asia. The Silk Road, the great commercial artery that had carried spices, silk, porcelain, and precious stones from China and India to European markets for centuries, now ran through Ottoman territory. They did not simply slam the door shut, but they taxed it heavily, made it dangerous, made it unpredictable in ways it had never been before. European merchants who had built entire economies around Asian luxury goods suddenly needed another way to get them. They needed a sea route. Within 40 years of Constantinople's fall, Vasco da Gama had rounded the southern tip of Africa and reached India by sea. Within 39 years, Christopher Columbus, a Genoese sailor who had grown up hearing about the fall of Constantinople, who understood viscerally why the overland routes were closing, sailed west from Spain seeking Asia, and found two continents that Europe did not know existed: the age of exploration, the opening of the Atlantic world, the colonization of the Americas, the birth of the global economy. Every thread, followed back far enough, leads to an Ottoman army standing outside the walls of Constantinople in the spring of 1453. But that is only the first chain of consequences. When Constantinople fell, its scholars fled. They carried manuscripts, the Greek philosophical texts, the scientific treatises, the mathematical works that Byzantium had preserved for 1,000 years while Western Europe forgot them. They fled to Venice, to Florence, to Rome, and the manuscripts they carried poured fuel onto a fire already beginning to smolder in Italy. The Renaissance, the rediscovery of Greek thought that transformed European art, science, philosophy, and political theory. The intellectual revolution that produced Leonardo and Michelangelo and Galileo, and eventually the scientific revolution and the Enlightenment, and the entire modern conception of human reason and individual rights. It did not emerge from nowhere. It emerged from the collision between a recovering Western Europe and 1,000 years of Byzantine scholarship that arrived all at once when the scholars ran. And there is a third chain: the failure of Western Christendom to save Constantinople, the site of a Christian city burning while Christian kings argued about politics and theology and who would pay for the ships, broke something in the idea of European Christian unity that never fully healed. The fault lines that cracked open in 1453 were still widening 60 years later when Martin Luther nailed his theses to a church door in Wittenberg, and the Reformation tore Western Christianity in half. One city, one morning, 3 revolutions. The Hagia Sophia still stands. Built in 537 AD, converted into a mosque by Mehmed II in 1453, converted into a museum by Ataturk in 1934, converted back into a mosque by the Turkish government in 2020. A building that has been sacred for nearly 1,500 years, claimed and reclaimed and argued over and prayed in by more civilizations than almost any structure on Earth. A building that holds inside its walls every contradiction of the city that built it and every civilization that conquered it. You cannot resolve the Hagia Sophia. You can only stand inside it and feel the weight of everything it has witnessed. Istanbul today is a city of 16 million people, still sitting on that same triangular peninsula, still controlling the passage between Europe and Asia, still the place where civilizations grind against each other. The language is different, the religion is different, the empire is different, but the geography is identical. The same strategic location that made Constantine build here in 330 AD still makes Istanbul one of the most consequential cities on Earth. The walls are still there too. Sections of the Theodosian walls still stand along the western edge of the old city, crumbling and magnificent, covered in vines, running through neighborhoods where children play football in their shadow today. And if you know what you are looking at, you can find the Kerkaporta, the small gate, the unlocked gate, the gap through which the medieval world poured out and the modern world poured in. It does not look like much, but the things that change history never do. We live in a world built entirely on the consequences of a Tuesday morning in May 1453. The sea routes that reshaped the global economy, the manuscripts that rebuilt Western thought, the map of the modern Middle East, the very concept of Europe as a distinct civilization, defined in part by what lies to its east. Columbus, da Gama, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the scientific revolution, the modern world, in almost every form you recognize it, all of it traceable to one city, one wall, one unlocked gate, one morning that the medieval world did not survive. And one man, a 57-year-old emperor who had been abandoned by every ally he had, who walked into that fight anyway, tore the crown from his chest, and disappeared into the last battle of a 1,000-year empire. History does not always remember the people who lose. But sometimes, the ones who go down swinging are the ones who made everything that came after possible. If this story hit different, if it made you see how fragile the turning points really are, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because most people think history is inevitable. It is not. It hangs on unlocked gates and wounded men and ships dragged across hills in the dead of night. It always has.